Today I have Olayemi Olurin, who I swear no one has been on my list for longer. This incredible human being is everywhere. And so if you haven't seen her yet, you're not looking in the right places. But I'm glad you found me, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, so she's a movement lawyer, a political commentator on many different channels and places, a writer in a lot of different places as well. A Bahamian Nigerian, the future abolitionist, was born and raised in Nassau, and she lived there until she moved here to the US only about 14 years ago. She's done quite a bit in that time. She's a public defender at Legal Aid Society. And for those who don't know, that means you represent people who can't afford to represent themselves. And of course, those people, uncoincidentally, are the people who are the vast majority of our system being churned and cycled. My friend is also a prominent voice in something really important locally, to decarcerate New York City, to decriminalize the people of New York City, and very specifically to close Rikers.
Yes.
Rikers is one of the most infamous jails in probably the world. It was the hotspot for COVID for quite a while. And I would say it's the most infamous pretrial detention center, due to the fact that in New York City and most other places, more than 75% of the people there haven't even been convicted of a crime. And 18 plus, how many have died there in the last year?
16 last year. We're at 15 this year, and that was the highest death toll since 2013.
Right. Insane.
Right.
Oh man, Ms. Olurin has been published in Teen Vogue, The Griot, News One, and has appeared on The Hill, MSNBC, CBS, and on and on and on. No need to read the entire list because it's way too long. But she also just appeared on The Young Turks, which I'm going to ask her about. And lastly, I just want to point out that you should subscribe to her Olurinati Substack,
Yes.
which she releases an essay every month on. So please do check that out. Thank you so much for joining me. Finally, I blame how busy you are and how bad at functioning I am.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. There's just an infinite amount of things to talk about. I probably could keep you for hours, but I promise not to. Let's just start with the thing I hinted at, since it's buzzworthy and least important. There's just one kind of pseudo MSM, pseudo leftist news channel called The Young Turks, and a lot of people on the left followed them, really intently, and then more recently realized they're not as left as they thought. A lot of liberals haven't caught on to some of the effects of that neoliberalism, but most recently they caught a lot of heat, even from me, and I never jump in these things. And I know you did not, which is one of the reasons you ended up on the show. They not only respect you, but they like you.
Yeah.
And so they said basically, defunding the police is stupid. Abolishing the police is stupid. We can't live without prisons and cops. And I honestly didn't listen to much of it. I was just not surprised, but not pleased. Tell me what happened when you went on the show.
So my first introduction to the Young Turks, believe it or not, I know I'd be on the news, but I'm not a regular watcher of the news. But my first introduction to the Young Turks was after I hosted Rising for a week in July, and they actually were really positive. Anna really gave me my flowers, and so that's my introduction to them. I'm like, all right, you've been nice to me. So when I saw the controversy on Twitter, mind you, my abolitionist soul was like, I want to jump in it too. And I did reply. I did quote tweet. I did say something. I just was nicer about it, because I'm like, all right, they've given me my flowers. I'm going to give them some grace here. And plus, and I'd reached out like, listen, we could talk about it. I'm a public defender here. I could tell you about it. So I tried to be good about it. I think, catch more, what they say, catch more with honey. So as far as on the Young Turks last night, it was good. I've been in more contentious environments in my day. I tried to approach it I wanted to have a chat. Honestly, I think if we're all on the same side of the fence, allegedly. I think let's try our best to see where we could come to some common ground. Because listen, I don't expect or need them to be abolitionists. I don't need everybody or expect everybody to become abolitionists. But what I really would like is some kind of common ground and respect for what we're doing, as not to attack the movement. On the right, you don't see that. If they know they're galvanized around the same foolishness, usually white identity politics, they don't attack one another. You don't hear them coming out and pointing out the inconsistencies of what's ridiculous. And there is a lot to say, but yet we do that on our side. And I'm like, listen, wait. Why are you going out of your way to negatively expose this movement to an audience that isn't familiar? So that, I think, is what I think is I think that's problematic. Less so what they believe. I think it's the dismissive nature with how they went about talking about it. And I think that can be dangerous, because so often the work we have to do is not just about, learning new things or teaching people new things, but helping them unlearn things, right? They have these, ideas about the system, and it doesn't help if they've never heard ideas that's already going to sound crazy to them. And then people that they respect, or people that, they tune into, like, ludicrous, ridiculous. They don't even attempt to, acknowledge where they could be grounded in anything reasonable. And the funny part is, people talk a lot about abolition like it just appeared 2 seconds ago just because they just heard about it. But I'm like, this is a movement that dates back decades. We have nothing but, there's no shortage of academia on it, scholars on scholarship on it. You can read about it. You can watch a video on it. I'm like, listen, personally, I know I'm talking about abolition every day. I can find a million videos, a million articles, and I'm not the only one. So I'm like, you know what? Let's try to take a step back and let's have an opportunity to talk about it. So we did, and I thought it went well. Anna was more receptive than Cenk, definitely. But I think it was a hearty discussion. Cenk and Anna, reached out after, like, we really expect that, have the conversations. As Cenk put it to me, let me challenge you because I know that you can answer the questions. And so maybe those are probably the questions. I know I've seen some of my followers did not like his approach towards me, but to shoot him some bail in his defense, I'm sure there are a lot of people on his side of the aisle or feel the way he feels, or viewers of the Young Turks, and they want they want it acts that way. So at least, by him doing that, he gives me the opportunity to answer it, and I can answer it. My problem in that life has never been not having the answer to a question or not having a position. It's just whether or not I have the opportunity to provide it. So at least they gave me that.
Wow. What a great answer. And I think it's really, for anyone sitting back and thinking, for one, I mean, I think most people would sit back and think, damn, that is not an easy thing to do, period. Like, there's not much debate around that. What I think is really noteworthy, though, is that people may not realize that your approach to that entire thing is an abolitionist approach.
Yeah.
It is the very nature of this ideology that you would give the word, you use the word grace. You would give them the opportunity to come together to have this conversation, right? Instead of just saying one mistake, let's just say they never made a mistake otherwise, but this is the one that caught your eye. You could have said, this is a huge mistake. I've judged you based on it. You are the worst thing you've ever said, and we're done. You are my enemy. But instead, you took it as an opportunity. And because of that, a lot more people know about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. The only negative thing I can think of is that you're even in a position where you have to say, he let me say it.
But unfortunately, that's the world we're in, right? I mean,
You're realistic. You're realistic, but I want to point out that you should be the head of that show, okay? Like not them. So not that you'd want to be, but
listen, listen, I recognize we're fighting against the status quo, right? That's the whole thing about resistance, right? Resistance implies that there's a much larger force. And so the viewpoints that they have, the general viewpoints about the criminal justice system and all of that, that's what's pervasive. That's what we're taught. That's what's the status quo. So you're always going to be the person putting your hand into the lion's mouth. It's always going to be that. So for me, I recognize that. I also think, to be reasonable, there aren't a lot of us in these spaces, right? Like, it's very hard traditionally, and if we look at throughout history, it's very hard for these kinds of viewpoints to make it to any kind of, main stage, because people actively try to quash it. They try to get rid of it, and not for nothing, it is their show. It's their, you know what I mean? It's their show. They can do whatever they want. And they live in a world where they can just say, you know, I don't even want to hear it. They could just be dismissive and say, I've seen a lot of different commentators. You know, everybody has their day where, you know, Twitter is not a fun place for you. I've seen a lot of commentators get ratioed, get pointed out, you know, how negative or how carceral their viewpoints are. And all they do is use that as some kind of, you know, ammunition for their hatred now for the left and just spend their every day now criticizing. So I'm going to give them credit. You know, at least they tried. Like, you know what? Okay, I heard the response, I heard the backlash. I thought Anna was very graceful how she started the segment. She acknowledged that they probably should have had a different kind of tone in the discussion. And so I'm like, all right, let's do it. Because not for nothing, my mom, listen, I live in the real world. I do not, believe it or not, my mommy and my daddy are not, you know, big radical abolitionists or something. My mommy is somebody who's had to day by day, you know, she calls me, she's like, you know what, I actually realized Olayemi was saying something sensible there, you know, that thing you said. And, you know, you notice it over time, or even like when I'm on the Hill, which is a far more, you know, we think the Young Turks isn't, but I'm usually on the Hill. So to me, I'm like, this is a pretty liberal environment by comparison. But when I'm on the Hill, you'll even see like Robbie's viewpoints towards bail have changed, or, you know, the prison system, just from hearing people repeatedly, you know, eventually you hear this information, you get exposed to it, and you don't even realize what day. I'm sure Robbie never woke up and was like, I agree with her today, but there's a lot he does agree with me now on bail reform. So I just look at it like, my job is to give people the information. Not everyone's going to like it. Not everyone's going to like me. And trust me, I know, but I'm going to give it to you and you do with it what you may.
Yes. And I think that it is, you know, there's two things that stood out to me. The first, you mentioned the resistance. This is not meant to diss you by any means. I stay away from that word because of what it has come to mean to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which is, and this is not, believe me.
Yes, no, you're fine. What's it come to mean?
This isn't my point. There's a reason for this. But my friends who are also far left, who don't want to say resistance, not only just don't want to say resistance, they have, many of them have essentially made enemies of those people.
Yeah.
And some, just a few who are really no longer my friends, have gone as far as to move to the right, as opposed to talking to these liberals.
Yeah.
Whereas I see it the way you see it. I think it's really important to note that at least ostensibly, we're all on the same side.
Yeah.
Yes, neither you nor I are unaware of what Martin Luther King said, for instance, about be careful of the liberals, they're even worse. We are aware. But if you're talking to a Nazi, you have a much farther way to go.
Right.
And you do talking to someone who tells you they support everything, but they just don't get it yet.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of what I do. And I think a lot of what you do. You do it in a much more visible way on the Hill. I do it in private conversations every day, like trying to convert people. And to your point, the other thing that stood out that many people don't necessarily think about is one, this is not just learning, it's unlearning.
Yeah.
We all were taught, you and I included, we're taught things that aren't true. So it's like, we're not at your, like, the way that you approach it with such care and like sensibility makes sense, because you realize that
people
like,
receive it better. People receive it better. People receive it a lot better when you validate how this felt to them. You know what I mean? Like I think people find it incredibly frustrating when something to them sounds, you know, just completely bare mind, outlandish, and you respond to them like, oh my God, you know what I mean? I've noticed that. And so to me, it's like, all right, if I give you the grade, I think that just might be the lawyer in me. I just know how to make, to me, making a stronger argument is conceding the reasonable parts up front. Like, listen, I know it sounds crazy. I know it sounds crazy, but if you just listen up a little bit more, let me just tell you, let me just explain it to you. And because listen, I consider myself, I am one of the most stubborn people around. My mommy and everybody tells me, my mommy, my ex-boyfriends, everybody, okay? So I'm incredibly stubborn. And even as somebody who thought the system was racist and unjust and was writing all about it, the first time it was said to me, I'm like, what is my crazy thesis advisor lady talking about? And so if I felt like that, and you could get me, I could be won over over time with information, then I know other people can too. But I recognize I think sometimes we get overwhelmed and stressed, feeling like I need to convince this person this one argument, like, oh, what are the facts or the information that I could share to them that they just can't dispute? People will dispute anything. And you can have all the evidence, but no one is just going to release their foundation, the things they've been taught to believe the first time it's challenged. They're just not. They're just not going to do that. So for me, I approach it like, I am not in it to convince you. You're going to stress me out if that is my goal. I'm not going to do that. I'm not trying to go on anybody's journey with them. Just like my thesis advisor didn't go on the journey with me. She gave me the book, she pointed me in the direction, and she tapped out. Okay. And to me, that's what I do.
All right. I'm going to make a joke, but first I want to say that, you know, that definitely seems like the right approach. And that's why, you know, for instance, only mention I'm going to make of it, but 10 Demands on our website, we have a huge library of resources.
Yeah.
Not that I wrote, but that Angela Davis wrote, you know, or, you know, Dereka wrote.
I get it. Trust me, I get it.
Exactly. But the difference between your amazing collection and my fake collection is that mine is designed to get people who don't know anything yet to start picking these up, right?
Yes.
And like, so there's a million places just like our library. We're not the only one, but the point is we have that because of what you said. There's decades of information here, but also you mentioned that like people will debate anything. Yes. My wife, who's a nurse and, you know, a science person, is like, well, that's just a fact.
Yeah.
But in politics, facts don't exist. Even numbers are debated. There are studies that say two conflicting things, which is why, to me, the most important thing isn't me spouting off numbers that I've been able to memorize. It's people telling their personal stories about how they were impacted.
Yeah.
And I think, like, you know, when you share stories from your work experience, that's one example of, you know, like there's only so much you can share legally, but when you give a sense of what it's like to be in a position like one of your clients, people maybe can understand it better.
Yeah.
Particularly if we tell the underlying story, right? That like cops in cages, even if you think they work, we can all agree they're not addressing what puts people in those places, right?
Yeah. You would think, but you'd be surprised.
Indeed. And one of the reasons for our collective inability to like move further in this direction is the obvious extreme level of copaganda, the like campaign against defund the police, which they don't even know how radical we are. They think it stops there.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, no, you're right. We don't want to defund the police. We want to fund the communities and get rid of the police. Like, let's be clear.
But to me, I think the fact that they attack to fund the police lends credence to why we're abolitionists, right? In the sense that I need to explain to people. I was actually having this conversation with Anna and them last night, but I'm like, the criminal system, it's not just that it happens to produce these terrible and just, you know, it's not like these systems are in place and it's, you know, it's a mistake and this is just a happenstance and we just happen to be attached to the program. It's like, no. Very much so intentionally, the system is designed to do this. And so for that reason, they resist. It's not that we have a problem with reform. It's not that we just want to say that the system cannot be reformed. We mean it cannot be reformed because you see them fighting us tooth and nail. What people need to remember is the exact same people that are the abolitionists that are pushing for, you know, trying to point out to you that the system is unjust and it needs to be abolished are the same people bringing to you your modest reforms that y'all claim we should have instead of going abolition, and you resist it tooth and nail. And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, in the same conversation last night on the Young Turks, I'm like, well, you're against me, you know, talking about abolition. That's so crazy. That's so radical. That's so crazy. So radical. Let's talk reform. But you're also telling me you're against all the reforms. You're against bail reform. You're against all of the modest reforms. So what does it really come to then? It sounds like you like the system as it is. That's what you're saying. Because when I'm telling you, oh, we need to bail reform for this reason, you're responding to me, well, then prosecutors can't pressure people to take pleas. It's like, yeah, that's bad. We don't want them to be able to do that. That's the point. So if I tell you don't want to let me work on the system, that's what I find interesting. You know, they tell us we're crazy radicals. We need to reform. We need to reform. And we're the ones proposing to reform. And they're like, no, absolutely not. I won't have it.
Well, let me tell you what the problem is. They may not even realize it, but the problem is that your reform, bail reform, actually chips away at the system.
Exactly.
And they only like reforms that strengthen it. So I bet you if we looked back, and enough with the Young Turks, forget them. It doesn't matter. If we look back at most of the people, I would say every freaking Democrat on TV and every politician who calls himself a Democrat supported the George Floyd Act. But did any of them talk about the Breathe Act? No, and you know why, but for the listeners who may not, the reason is because the George Floyd Act would have given 750 million more to the police, and wouldn't even have made what happened to George Floyd illegal. Whereas the Breathe Act, created by Ms. Tiffany Flowers and many others at Movement for Black Lives, actually begins to create an alternative humanist society where we're actually addressing the underlying causes of why people are forced to commit crimes. So no one heard about that.
Right. I mean, that's exactly how it goes. I was critical. I spoke on BNC about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Acts at the time and explained why it was not effective, most of what it did. The only part of it that was good that they would never allow is anything that addressed qualified immunity, but the rest of it was redundant. We already have, actually, in terms of the chokehold, that the neck restraint that killed George Floyd, that's already outlawed in most police departments in the country. Just like, again, what people forget is so is murder, so is everything that the police do. It's all illegal. It's illegal. It just isn't illegal when the police do it, because we don't hold the police to a standard. So it really doesn't matter how many laws we pass saying that it's illegal for police to do the illegal things we already said it was illegal to do. It would be illegal if I kneeled on you, even if it didn't kill you, even if it did not kill you, if I did that to you, that would still be assault. That would be a crime. So what are we even discussing, really?
That's interesting. Somehow I don't think anyone has even ever said it that way.
Yeah,
like, we all know fundamentally that the system is doing exactly as it was supposed to, that policing is a white supremacist institution, and you can and that's not pejorative. It was created from slavery in the Black Code. So it's not debatable, but we never talk about it in the way that you just mentioned it. Which is cool. And for those that don't know, cops steal more in value than all the robberies committed every year.
And what people also don't realize is that people, America has a lot to do. And so many of America's institutions has everything to do with PR and branding, but the way there are slogans, there are things that we're taught to believe, and they're taught that just to lend credence to the system. They were empty from the jump. When you think of the presumption of innocence, that's a fallacy. That's never existed. And then when you look at the rest of this criminal system we have, it clearly was protect and serve. That's so people buy into that, but in actuality, that's literally never been the obligations, has never been the stated purposes. Or even when when I have conversations about bail reform, always the response back to people talk to you about public safety, they assume that that's already a standard for and it's not. It has nothing to do with anything. There's no public safety component. That's not the factor. It's the legal standard is, will they return to court? And instead we created a system that says poor people won't, even though poor people are the only people in court.
And also the least likely to go anywhere.
Yes.
Anyway, on that note, since we've hit on it a few times, dive into that briefly for me. What is bail reform and why do we need it?
Well, bail reform looks different depending on which jurisdiction, but in New York City, we had landmark bail reform passed in 2020, and we made many misdemeanors and nonviolent crimes. And when I use nonviolent crimes, I want to be clear, I'm literally talking about where there is no violence. No one was harmed, because violent crime is a legal definition. And every day I grow frustrated with the way that it is tossed around. And it's a problem. The reason why we create these definitions is so that we can talk about it in media and people latch onto it. People don't realize that most people, in fact, charged with and convicted of a violent crime didn't harm a soul. There was no one harmed in it. But if you create a legal definition where, robbery is automatically violent crime, this or whatever is violent crime, this or whatever, so then people go to jail on that. But what New York City did was we took a lot of these misdemeanors, traffic infractions, nonviolent crimes, and we made them non-bail eligible. So we still have a cash bail system, but there are certain crimes that they cannot set cash bail on at all. There's a presumption for release. When you look at a place like New Jersey's eliminated the cash bail system altogether. There is none, not for misdemeanors, not for felonies. They have a system where people can be detained pre-trial if they are a danger to public safety. So that's what New Jersey has. And what Chicago has now is a mild, Chicago is trying to implement in January 2023, which is the Pretrial Fairness Act. They would eliminate cash bail. They would eliminate the cash bail system, but what would happen is certain crimes would be, again, presumption to be released. However, when it comes to prosecutors would still have the opportunity to have people detained pre-trial if they can show evidence that the person is a danger to public safety, they're a risk of flight from prosecution, if they violate any of the terms of their release, or if they are just charged with any particular violent crime. So that is how it would work. And it's necessary because people are dying at pretrial detention centers all over the country. And that's what people don't realize. Rikers is infamous. We know that. Everyone's heard of Rikers. I heard about Rikers long before I ever thought about moving to America. My mommy and all of us knew about Rikers. But we done enough. When I told my mommy that Rikers was pretrial, she was blown away. Because when you hear about something that's such an infamy, instead it has the opposite effect that harms the people in there, because you would think, you know, hearing about Rikers is this horrible place would make people sympathetic, but what they do is they assume everybody in Rikers is this horrible person that's been convicted of these horrible things. But everybody in Rikers is there because they don't have the money for bail. They haven't had a trial. They haven't been convicted of anything. So this, which is just a reflection of the fact that we really don't have a presumption of innocence in this country at all. So what's happened in Rikers is a structure, is a facility built to hold 3,000 people, 3,000. Rikers holds 5,000 people right now. They have 5,000 people. So people are crowded in cells. People are packed into shower stalls. There's no space. People are dying. They are killing themselves. They are catching illnesses, and it is out of control. And last year we had the highest death toll we'd had since 2013 with 16 deaths. This year we're already at 15 and the year is not done. And so that is what calls for the need for that. And when you look at Cook County in Chicago, they've had 60 deaths since 2017. They have one of the worst pretrial detention centers in the country. I think the average waiting for a trial in Cook County is like 4 years. So
what?
Yes.
That's the average time?
I think it's around the average time. People are there for a year. Cook County has an excessive speedy trial issue.
Let me just put this in perspective for people. Like, you know, look at me, right? I was really stupid, and way before weed was legal, I decided I was going to smoke pot inside a train station.
I support you.
What?
I said I support you. I support you in that. Like,
man, was that stupid.
Boy, can I understand though. Like,
of course. Yeah, I thought it was the right thing, and really deep down it was, but the cops didn't agree. Okay, so I go to jail. Now, I don't have any money, but guess what? My dad does.
Yeah.
You know, I called him and he took care of that. For that thing that I did that harmed no one but annoyed a cop who just happened to be standing there, I might have been in jail for 4 years. And I did do something.
That's how it works. And that's unfortunately how it works. And it, you know, it's unfortunate the way that people respond to even hearing those things. There's always this answer of like, oh, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. First of all, that response tells me that y'all don't believe in the presumption of innocence. Like, and I don't have a problem with that. I just wish America would be honest about it. Because there isn't one. So it's not like admitting it changes anything, but I wish people would say that. That's one. But two, there is no person that you could put a magnifying glass on and they're not committing some kind of crime, especially in a country that over polices and over criminalizes everything. America has the broadest, widest latitude of laws to be able to criminalize who they feel like it. Because I've been in America for 14 years, but I went to white schools, right? A bunch of white schools while I was here. I didn't find out until I was a public defender, they were arresting people for cursing people out. They were arresting people for regular. Do you know how many people I would like, do you know how long I'd be in jail if I was aware, if you weren't even existing in particular kinds of spaces? If we criminalize people in the Bahamas the way that we criminalize them in America, the entire Bahamas would be in prison. The entire Bahamian Republic. So there's something people don't realize because they're not criminalized in that way. So what they think is when they hear that anybody had an interaction with the criminal system, it's like, you must have been doing something. What were you doing? What are you, da-da-da? And they have this idea of crime. It's based on, you know, these TV shows that they watch all their life that tell you crime is this, New York City is Gotham City. And it's like, no, what happens is we live in communities like the one I live in Flatbush, where I see police. I'm not exaggerating. There are at least 2 police on every block that I walk, you know, and more than that usually. I just yesterday coming home, there were over 10 police on the corner of Flatbush just to wait by the subway station to harass the Black kids coming off the subway from school and arresting them for playing around. That's what you're dealing with. So when you live in communities like that, different response.
Definitely. And when I lived in Bed-Stuy for a while, I witnessed this multiple times. I'm sitting on a stoop in public, weed still illegal, smoking a blunt, unmarked vans screech to a halt, collect every single person on the block except me.
Yep.
And I'm the only one visibly breaking the law.
listen to me. I have represented over 1,000 people, right? Let's think about this. New York City is a city of 10 million people. Of 10 million people, we have Rikers. Rikers, over 90%, in a city with 10 million people, over 42% of the people are white. So even though this is an incredibly diversity, the vast majority population is still white people, right? Yet Rikers makes up over 90% of the people incarcerated. Rikers are Black or brown. I have represented over 1,000 people. I could count on these two hands how many white people I've come across represented. And I remember them all because they're so few and far and in between. And let me say this to you. I don't have a single white client whose case was not disposed of or dismissed before in absolutely no time. And that's how it works. And it's not like you think before, when you hear about the system being as unjust as it is, the good faith assumption people have towards a system they've been taught to believe in, to think is just, is to believe that it is something they have to parse out. Like if you look at the statistics, you'll realize it, or blah, blah, blah. No, walking in court, it's on its face. I remember the first time realizing, same judge, same prosecutor, I have my pile of cases. I represent the Black guy who had a blunt and they asked for thousands of dollars worth of bail. Immediately after, represent a white guy found with a bag full of drugs. You know what I mean? You would think it would be an intent to sell if he was somebody else. The prosecutor consents to release, case dismissed at the next court date. That's the kind of thing that happens. So it tells me that's what my problem with having the constant response be like, oh, well, you shouldn't do crime, and we need to have this, and people are doing crime, and da-da-da-da-da. And even just the resistance to abolition, because I don't care what nobody says. If white America had to deal with police the way that we have to deal with police, if police arrested white children, white fathers, white mothers, if they did to them what they do to us, if they were in white communities the way they are in ours, if they responded to us the same way, this system would be gone. They wouldn't be interested in any kind of compromise, have you seen the level of indignance on white people when they feel wronged, when someone tells them something, anything of any kind, let alone, even have you seen white people respond to the police when they disapprove of what the police have to say to them or about anything? So I can't listen to the hoopla. The only reason why it's so, there's so much refusal to even entertain the idea of this system being gone is because the people that suffer in that system are Black and brown. And my last piece that I want to say when it comes to abolishing the system, why they think it's so absurd is, honestly, the true tea of it is it's us. That's the tea. It's because it's us. They're very invested in it, and they love to tell you about like, oh, crime, but it's not in your neighborhoods. That's the thing, right? The argument is never that the crime is happening in white communities or happening in the suburbs, happening in the middle class. The same people the victims are the same people that are the defendants, right? Are the people that are the criminals. It's the same victims, the same people in our community. So how is it that the people always, we're so scared and fear mongering, and the people that never interact with this, and then they turn around and tell you as the Black person that's the proponent or for why this system should be gone, they go and tell you that you're not speaking for the interests of people. Like, absolutely,
yep, they need to tell you what you need. Yes. Even though, and that includes, of course, white cops from other communities who don't know you. That's where it starts. You need to be constantly monitored and harassed by people that don't look like you and don't know anything about you. You're absolutely right. And it's been shown that one interaction with a police officer significantly increases the likelihood of future criminality.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an interesting element to that whole concept and the language also. Mm-hmm. There are no cops to interact with white people in the first place, and then even if they did, they wouldn't be back to harass them after.
Right.
It's because they're there, and it's because it's their job to be doing that, and so it's built in, and it's and one of the reasons it's built in isn't just this deep historical, very American hatred for people with melanin. It's also that this country was founded on slavery, and this is our way of maintaining slavery.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one thing that we haven't touched on is what we call the prison industrial complex, which is, all of these things inextricably tied for economic incentive. Is there anything you want to make sure people understand about that element, that area, that angle to this?
The only thing I would want to add, and I make sure I want to point out often, This is actually, I think, a thing in general with the system, and people who, like, liberals who they're outraged, their conscience is shocked when they see a police killing video, but ultimately they still believe in the system and the police and everything. They like to cherry pick one thing that they could be like, that's really bad, but not the rest of it. They love to do that with private prisons, like, oh, private prisons. Prison, period. All of the prisons, public prison, private prison, they are all making money and using prison labor, all of them, whether it be private or prison, public prison. The entire point of the prison system is to do that, is to turn Black people, brown people, and the people incarcerated there into labor. Rikers is not a private prison, and yet that did not stop Cuomo from rolling back bail reform and trying to make sure more people got incarcerated, and had the people incarcerated at Rikers and incarcerated upstate in New York City making all the hand sanitizers and the masks for people, but yet they could not use it, they could not get it, they could not get any safety protocols. It has nothing to do with whether or not it's just private or public. Private might be worse in your heart and your eyes. I think it just shocks you more. I think it gives you more of the inclination that something is wrong here. When you hear something is private, something's being bought, it sends more of that signal to you. But the government does the same thing. In fact, no one is more likely to use your body as labor than the government. So
yeah, absolutely. And that is one of the things I loved everything you said about it. I loved how you said it, because it blows my mind, the lack of information just in that one tiny pocket. Like,
yes.
Everyone was, yeah, Joe Biden, when he said he was going to, I don't even think he did, right? Like eliminate private federal prisons.
Yeah.
That's like 3% of the total prison population.
Yes.
And not only that, in addition to what you said about all the state and federal prisons and every single facility holding people, has money incentives. There's also the fact that when you talk about private prisons as separate, distinctly bad, you're actually strengthening the system by suggesting the alternative isn't.
Yes.
And anyone who would leave these federal private prisons, they're not getting released. They're just being moved to a public prison.
Yes, and that's ultimately what they want. That's just the truth of the matter, is they like the system as it is. And people just don't have enough honest conversations with themselves. One thing I can appreciate about the Bahamas is, even where we are incredibly ignorant and regressive, we are honest. Like, we are very honest. Our politicians will just tell you the terrible thing outright. You know what I mean? Names will say what's up. And I wish it would be more of an honest conversation about that. That you know what, ultimately you like the system maintained, because listen, there are over 2 million people in this country in prison. And I wonder too this. If we were arguing, and it's a hypothetical, but if we were arguing in the reverse, instead of arguing for abolition, instead of me arguing and letting you know this criminal system is racist and what it's doing to marginalized communities, instead I said, let's level up. Let's police white people's communities the same way. Let's put all the police in there, lock them up too. Let's do it too. If instead of having a conversation and trying to explain to you how Black people are criminalized and unfairly criminalized in the way it goes about us, let me tell you how white people are. What if I spent my days letting you know about all the white crime I've seen? Because I'm going to say this to you, most of the things I've seen from white people. The first time I ever seen people doing drugs and stuff like that was in my white schools. That's the fact. I've never seen more cocaine usage than on people I went to school with that are now prosecutors today. I've never seen more people fighting, doing more crime, doing more meth. The only difference is it's not treated as crime. What is crime has everything to do with what the narrative is. You watch so many, this is something I think about in life so often. How many times you're just listening to white people tell you about a story, a fun, youthful night and everything, and it's a crime. Fighting under, you know what I mean? Getting into fights. Oh, we got in a fight at the bar. I punched my boy and blah, blah, blah. Crime, assault, violence, crime. Watch How to Get Away with Murder. They stealing the blue horn out of the restaurant for robbing. Crime. You know what I mean? No, this is a serious thing. I think about this all the time. The only difference is they don't associate it that way. You watch Sex and the City, Carrie and them smoking weed, they get arrested and they're out in 2 seconds. They instead create a narrative where crime, literally the words crime, you think of it as crime, it's only associated with us. You could watch the exact same activities, but it's the narrative around it, it's da. So that's the thing that makes it disingenuous to me, because at the end of the day, if you even just look at a Joe Biden, if you even look at, and I don't even have the energy to be on Joe Biden's back, but if you even look at Joe Biden, crime Bill Biden, but when I have no problem. I'm not one of those people. I could care less about the Hunter hysteria. I don't care at all. But I do know I've heard quite a little bit about some crime. I'm like, I've seen you, and for people that so believe in the system, if you believe the system, if you actually thought the system had anything to do with justice, if it had anything to do with correcting issues, if it had anything to do with preventing crime or helping someone, why are white people so against having the system applied like that against them? Because they will move heaven and hell to make sure their children aren't criminalized the same way, don't go to jail for whatever they did. How many times have we seen it? How many famous people, how many politicians we have? Didn't Pelosi somebody get in trouble the other day with a DUI? My point is, how comes that's never the response? It's only you did something wrong. It's only crime, police when it comes to us. So that's the thing that makes it makes it disingenuous. It's like, I want to believe that you're just ill-informed, but it seems like you just don't have any compassion for us.
Boom. Wow. That's exactly why I had you on. Thank you. Yeah. And I also would point out that it's kind of a miracle we even heard about Pelosi's husband's DWI or whatever, because unlike, had Jay-Z had a DWI, it really wasn't written about anywhere.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, exactly. I saw that once. I mean, as opposed to on every single freaking channel.
Yeah.
And you mentioned recently, actually, that the copaganda is targeting Black audiences.
It is.
I've talked to others about New York Times, NPR, these big things, but these big, I guess you'd say, like MSM things, but there are a couple, Black publications, or at least at one time Black-owned publications that you mentioned. Can you explain what that means exactly?
So I was talking about the Chicago Bail Reform, the Pretrial Fairness Act in general, because it's been branded as the purge law, and you see Shade Room, Baller Alert, all these meme pages, all these Black gossipy outlets that they don't even usually convey this kind of news, but they're paid, right? All these are paid advertisements. They're paid by who, what to run. And so now they're running this purge law stuff right to Black people. And so we don't, and it's deliberate, and it's unfortunate, because what people love to use Black people as, they use this as props in arguments all the time on both sides. When they need us during election season, all of a sudden it's trust Black women, it's believe Black women, oh, Black women did this for us, and then 2 seconds later it's, and then on the flip side of that, what they do is whenever it's the same reason why you have the Herschel Walkers and those, they serve as bodies just to legitimize white talking points. And so that's what happens here. They take this kind of propaganda and this kind of hysteria because, first of all, these audience they know nothing about it, right? And people tend to trust people would not be able to fathom just how dishonest media is. And it's actually surprising to me, even as a person who writes and who's in media, because the level of scrutiny I, as a Black person, as a Black expert in so many fields, is put under. Even when I have statistics, I have I have it cited. They do not want to let me, it's opinion. I know what you're saying, but I don't want you to say that word. And I've had people fight me about putting the racial demographics of Rikers in articles and stuff. Those are kinds of things. Meanwhile, they could come up with full-on propaganda that's just quite literally a lot. The amount of outlets, including Shade Room, Baller Alert, and I've seen these places arguing that Chicago PD can't make arrests. They're not able to make arrests anymore. It's using sensationalized cases Chicago PD has put out now, being like, look at what's happening, and we can't arrest. The law doesn't even go into effect till January 2023. And it has nothing to do with arrest. It's a bail law, just not even close. But what they do is by putting that out to Black people, and then having Black people be in the comments like, oh my God, no, oh my God, the purge, da, da, da. Then they say, oh, this has no support, no progress, you know what I mean? This is crazy, no one wants this, because they use Black people like that. When it's incredible, when we're liberal, we're Black people, statistically the most progressive group in this country. Black women and Black men vote more progressively than anybody else. We support the most progressive initiatives. This is just the truth. We are the ones putting the most progressive, all these Democrat politicians, we put them in office. It's all us doing it. But whenever we do support something progressive, then it's some radical mess. They don't listen to us. And then what they do is they reframe it back to us as some propaganda. And they say, look, even the Black people don't support this. They don't listen to these Black radicals like myself. They don't speak for the Black community. And they say, look here. Meanwhile, you are deliberately paying millions of dollars to misinform the Black community.
Damn. So that's an element to the propaganda I had not heard before.
Yeah.
Certainly the idea of Black people basically being used as puppets on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course it is the system, the white people doing that to blame, just to be clear.
Yeah.
That part I've certainly had thought a lot about, but
and make sure criticize the Black outlets too, because I think this is a
problem.
Because and I'm not going to get into a whole conversation on capitalism, the problems with people thinking Black capitalism, all that's going to save us.
No.
But this is quite literally a reflection of that, right? These are money making publications that they're in the business of gossip and all that. But for the right coin, they will completely leave. They will stray away from what is even their bread and butter and use and market this stuff towards the audience with no regard for what are the actual implications. And it's funny because when you really think of it, looking at the shade room, right? So often you see in the shade room, they're posting about this Black rapper that has been arrested or profiled because his lyrics, or is incarcerated because of this, because the people in Georgia are keeping him in, and all these different things. And everybody in the comments are like, free my boy, free my this. They're talking about it, system's unjust, F12, all this, blah, 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 blah. But then you will be the same people just internalize all of the mess, all of the propaganda, and be actively espouse, oh no, the purge. And it's like, make it make sense. The post before this is you upset that your boy is in jail and can't get out pre-trial. You know what I mean? Like, think about that. And that's how it happens. That's how you end up with a situation where, the young thugs and the gunners are still incarcerated off some foolishness. And that's because, look at this. So criticize them.
Yeah. I mean, well, it is like it's a former Nazi's place more than anyone else's to go into a gang of Nazis and convert them into better human beings.
Right.
It is not my place to tell a Black person what they should or shouldn't be doing with their channel. But like,
it's not necessarily my place, but I'm gonna say it.
Well, right, you're right. So I was gonna say, like, I have this platform for people like you who, like, I want to hear myself talk a lot less, and you saying that is way more powerful than me saying it.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's from like an emotional humanist perspective, like, of all the things we've talked about, like, that's the part that made me the most like tearful, because like the other people who tend to be liberal or whatever and help get the right politicians as much as that's possible are the Jews, my people.
Yeah.
And I would never do that to my people. And not only that, because of the way I was treated as a Jew, that's the reason I am who I am, and why I would never do that to you or your people, and why I don't really even think of it that way. We're all one people, and we shouldn't be doing this to each other. But like, there's just something about doing it to your own community that like hurts, even more. I know I've kept you for almost an hour. I want to finish up, unless there's something specific you want to touch on. And by the way, for what it's worth, you are always welcome back, and I will switch my schedule around for you.
Thank you.
But unless there's something specific you wanted to touch on, I just wanted to close with like some positive thoughts, like, as opposed to cops in cages. And a lot of this stuff is already happening. So for those who don't know, there are alternatives. There's a website, their Twitter is who can I call? It's by region, dozens of policing alternatives. So you don't have to call 911. That's just one thing.
Right.
I always like to ask people I love and respect, like you, like, if someone in your community says, what can I do?
Can I do?
Yeah, what do we do? How do we change this, to the best of our abilities without a full-scale revolution, that is?
I know people tend to think, I get a lot of messages very often from people telling me, I inspired them to go into law, to become a public defender, and yada, yada, yada. And I think all of that is important work. But I think I am a harm reductionist as a public defender at most, right? That's just the truth. I do my very, very best to make sure my clients are represented, to make sure that I give voice to them, to make sure that I can make this experience as minimally psychologically harmful as I possibly can. But that being said, to me, to do real work, it requires advocacy has to be extended far beyond the courtroom. It requires me to go and educate people. And for that reason, I do think educators, personally, that's my personal, I think educators are the most important people in this work. I would not be, let me put it to you this way. I knew I was going to be a lawyer. I was going to be a lawyer since I was 7 years old. I came to America because I wanted to be a lawyer, and I was in law school, undergrad, committed to being a lawyer. But I would have probably been like a divorce lawyer or something like that. I thought that was spicy for attention, for drama. Like, I was like, ooh, Let me get these people's, you know what I mean? That'll be drama. That'll keep me hyped for the rest of my life. And then I'm writing my thesis, and my thesis advisor put it to me. She said to me, she called me Dr. Kathleen Sullivan. I don't get tired of shouting her out. But she called me a gap scholar, which is an affectionate term. She meant it affectionately, but a gap scholar is someone in academia who points out problems, but they don't necessarily have a solution, but that's important. You need that person in academia. But I remember saying, you know what? The legal system, the criminal system is disproportionately, we are, as Black people, we're disproportionately overrepresented, but we are barely 5% of attorneys, and even less of that are people that represent our clients. And I was like, it feels woefully insufficient for me personally, for the only Black person in the courtroom to be the defendant, and for me to go do something in this profession that doesn't help. And if it weren't for the fact that this woman educated me and she taught me about abolition, that it's hard. People sometimes, they don't want to feel like, when you tell them, talking, educating people, they don't want to hear that answer because it doesn't feel as tangible, right? You don't feel like you don't know how many people you directly impacted. Like, I know how many people I got out of jail, but I don't know how many minds I changed and what the long effect of that is. But that to me really shows me, if that woman didn't say that, if she didn't educate me the way she did, if my professors did not educate me in that way, it doesn't matter how much potential I had and all these different things, I would have never got those people out of jail. I would never have the viewpoints I have, and I wouldn't be educating people that way. So to me, is what you really can do is shift social consciousness. You know what I mean? Get informed to educate other people, because the reality is, although we live in this society where this is pervasive, racism, systemic racism, this prison system, all these things have been there before us, and they're very ingrained in our society, and they hang on to it. And we have politicians and legislators and all these people that, try and reinforce it. But the reason, at the end of the day, those people are power inclined. That's what they really want. They want power, and they want to maintain their power. If they believe, should the society eventually change enough and respond, they respond, right? Like, the day we live in 2022 is not the time. This is not even the country. This is not the world I lived in 2009. This isn't the world, 2011, even 2015. Things have drastically changed. Our media has changed, the way they cast things. Everything has changed to what is public opinion. So if public opinion shifts, if we are able to shift social consciousness, eventually the rest of it will shift with it. And so for me, the most important thing is to educate the public. Because if you get the public, informed, if you realize that, if the public realizes, the things I've been taught to believe about the system are untrue. What I'm believing in the system is reinforcing it. My unintentional beliefs are leading to these kinds of the reproduction of these kind of injustices, it will change. So to me, that what can you do is inform yourself and go talk to the people, because I can't educate everybody. I can't have one-on-one conversations with everybody. You can't do it either. None of us can. It's going to be it takes a village. It takes a village. So for me, the what can you do is always, you can go run your mouth. You don't have to run it on Twitter. You don't have to run it on the media, but you got to run it somewhere. You got to go talk to somebody. Help me out. Let's do the work. Let's see who we could radicalize, because that will really change it. So that's my answer.
Perfect. Community by community.
Yes.
Wow. That was a fast hour.
Good. Love it.
So much. I would keep you on for longer. But in addition to you being busy, as I always say, the attention spans of everyone, including myself, suck these days. So thankfully, I'm going to pull some. I have an infinite number of quotes to pull out from you, because every single thing you say is a talking point.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm glad we finally got to do it. Yeah. I was like, all right. I was like, I'm not gonna do my boy like this again. Let me do it.
Yeah, exactly. No matter what, I got one hand, we are doing this.
All right.
And it was as great as I thought. Please keep doing the amazing work you're doing. I'll just keep watching in awe.
Thank you. Have a nice day, Boo.
You too.